Hello, welcome to the first Communication PD hosted by CTLA. Presenting is Dr. Sherry Rysdom, and we are focused on teaching writing in your field today. Welcome.
Thank you. So you can see up on the board what we have coming. So this is the first one, and I was hoping that it would be sort of a conversational presentation where we could talk about our experiences with writing in our classes, the successes that we're having, the challenges that we're having, maybe talk to each other about what it is that we do. However, I know a lot of people had scheduling conflicts since university updates are happening right now. And so I sort of shifted gears a little bit so that maybe I'll do kind of a more presentation-y thing. So for people who may be watching this later can get something out of it in that regard. But I still want to hear about your experiences writing, teaching writing in your classes. So to start, I wanted to just learn who was here and what program you teach in, and do you teach UWR? And so I think that's always an interesting question to ask, because sometimes people don't know if they're teaching a UWR class, right? So let alone what it means to teach a UWR class. So thinking about that. And then maybe think about what are the common writing assignments that you have as part of your class, whether it's UWR or not. I think every discipline has writing to some extent. Sort of my students always say, I'm not going to need writing in my job though, right? I guarantee you will. Even the firefighters, right, end up writing. And then think about what are some of the challenges that you have with teaching writing. What are the concerns you have about teaching writing in your classes? And then what do you think what are the successes? What do you think is going well? What do you think is important? That sort of thing. So just taking a moment to reflect on these answers for yourself. And I'll give you a minute to think about that. All right, does anyone want to share a little bit about their thinking, about their answers to this?
I'll go first. My name
Thanks.
is AA, so alphabetically I think I come first. Aaron Thornburg, program is anthropology. Oh.
Do we want this to be
Okay.
online?
Okay. Aaron Thornburg. My program is anthropology. I teach a number of UWR classes. Our methods class is actually a UWR, and so it's the production of a research proposal at the end. Our capstone projects, of course, end up in substantial UWR things. And I'm actually thinking of changing our language and culture class to a UWR, because it's the class that we've had listed as the communication learning objective using the AAC&U rubric, and yet it's not a UWR class. And so I was like, why is it a UWR? And so I'm looking at that. I've already listed and described some of the writing assignments.
Just a sec. Are those 400 level courses you listed, or what
Methods is 391, so it's a high a junior level class, and then the capstone class is like a 403, so it's kind of like a finishing thing. And we have like a 401 where they do library research, development of the research, and then they undertake the research, and then they write it up in 403 and in several different drafts. And so in line with the UWR model. They turn in drafts, and I respond to these drafts, and then they kind of put them all together as a final paper in the end. And that's the same for both the message class and the capstone class. With the language and culture class, I'm actually thinking of trying to integrate digital storytelling practice, which I do in other classes. And so it would be like scripts and lists of assets and things like that they would be working on in drafts throughout the term. But that's future thinking. Challenges is kind of keeping it fun, I think, like keeping it exciting, because so many students seem to take it as kind of an arduous practice. And when you're doing things like a research proposal and a final capstone paper, I get it. But maybe with the digital storytelling assignment, maybe we could keep it a little bit more fun, interesting for the individual student. So that's one of the challenges, I guess. And as far as successes, we've had lots of successes. We've had these research projects that have gone on and turned into successful capstone projects. I've had capstone papers that have won the Burgess, and I have students regularly. I only teach the capstone every other year, and it used to be every only third year, but I always have students that are turning them into the Burgess or submitting them for consideration in the Social Science Journal, and a lot of them have been published there. So I would say those are kind of the writing successes that I've had.
Wow, that's great. Anybody else want to share? Yeah, thanks, Nancy.
Nancy Knowles in English writing, yes, UWR, and heavy writing intensive probably throughout my coursework. Common writing assignments I do when I teach literature. I teach the sort of academic essay because literary scholars operate in that mode. I also teach grant writing, and I teach first year composition. So kind of a wide variety, I guess. I also have creative writers in the capstone, so I don't really do a whole lot with them at that level because they've already had a lot of creative writing coursework. But so I also have to at least provide feedback to them there. And then challenges. I think currently I have two. One is getting students to do analysis of evidence. They like to kind of drop the evidence, add a sentence, and run away. And I have a whole class full of students in my Shakespeare class this term that we've been working on close reading, but they haven't done it yet in their, like they'll do it sometimes in casual conversation, but they won't put it in their papers. So I have to work on that a little bit with them next week. Another challenge is getting students to revise. So again, I think what they want to do is drop the paper and run away from it and never look at it again. And they can't do that in my classes. They have to revise. Successes would be, like this fall, I had a really kind of exciting experience because I asked students to do primary research before I had them read scholarly articles. So by having them do primary research and put it into a sort of an IMRAD format where they're talking about methods and results and analysis and stuff like that, I had them do it, and then they started reading. So by the time they were reading scholarly articles, they knew the structure of them, which was really cool. So that was a big aha moment for me watching them do that.
How do I say that in 3 words, Nancy?
Like I want to say, do the hands-on before the reading. Like get them to do something similar. I don't know how to say that. Writing for reading. Well done.
Catchy. That's a book title, Erin. Thanks.
Other successes. Oh, I'm working with another group of students this term writing a scholarly article as a class. So instead of having students do their own analyses individually, we are doing one 25-page paper together. And that's been really fun. I've seen a lot of ownership happening that doesn't happen sometimes with individual assignments.
And that's also resulted in publication.
Might as well just go.
That's great.
All right, so I'm Dave Dallas, and I teach in the College of Education. Last year, I did fill in for a professor in a UWR class for one of our ESOL methods and research classes. But then this past year, Angela and I co-piloted a class for our seniors that is part of kind of their, I guess you would call it their capstone. It's for their professional teaching portfolio, but we really looked at the beginning of their teaching portfolio, they have to look in depth into what we call a context for learning, and it looks at the community, the school, and the classroom, and they have to give in-depth analysis on this. And it's funny that you talk about get the research and this and then drop it and run away, because a lot of our work in the PTP and as a score for students at a different Oregon institution, I notice, oh, they have all this stuff and then there's no analysis below it. And so I think what we have been trying to do with them is, because the PTP is pretty writing intensive, is to get them used to that, but also understanding what their writing looks like, what other people's looks like, and they had to go in and get the research, write about it, and then not only did they have to present it, but they then had to have a peer review. So they would have one of their peers review it and give them feedback, which is always interesting because people are always willing to give feedback, and then do they apply what they're giving as feedback in their own writing, which is always kind of interesting, because I would see that even with students. It's like, well, I noticed this about this, this, and this. And I was like, oh, yes. And yet, when you're doing your own writing, you're doing the same exact thing. So I think one of the successes, well, the challenge, I think, is just getting them to understand that you have to go in depth with this. And that not only will help you meet the requirements for the UWR in terms of scope, breadth, and length of what they are needing to do, but I think it also helps them as they continue on, as they're working on their PTP, the professional teaching portfolio. And I think one of the successes I've noticed and perhaps I've noticed it as I am looking at students from different schools, is I feel like from what I saw of our students at the beginning, or that they were turning in for their final project, that they were putting a lot more depth, focus, and analysis in their writing, and it was had a I guess, for lack of a better term, I thought our students were doing better with that portion of the PTP than what I have seen from our sister school that we score. And I think some of it has to do with the fact that we were having them take that time to really spend that time analyzing it, and then they're able to utilize that as they begin the narratives for the rest of their capstone that they're working on.
Did you call those portfolios, or?
Yeah, they're portfolios. The only thing I would add on is that having students critique each other, they had to learn how to do that. Mm-hmm. That's not a given. And especially critiquing in a critical, concise way. As well, just reiterating that even though their UWR writing was, let's say, the beginning part of their portfolio, we did see the skill begin to transfer to the data analysis components that they were able to write and kind of stick in it a little bit longer. Where in the beginning of the portfolio, we may have saw some of that drop off. Like the beginning part of the analysis was good, but by the time they got to maybe the school section, you could tell they ran out of steam. But then by the time they got to the analysis section a few segments later, they'd picked up that steam again and had built enough skill to really have the skill to be able to talk about it and get in there and go for it. So you saw some growth in a 8-month period. That was pretty cool to see. So
That's great. We're just talking about our successes, challenges, and the types of writing that we we teach in our class. Oh, great. Do you want to jump in now or share what you do?
Well, I have some moving around of my UWRs to do because the person who taught this particular course before me did it, teaching kind of the five paragraph, and I do a lot more creative stuff. So I need to move my UWRs around a little bit, but I do have a third year course that we do a multi-project in. But even in my other class, there's a autobiography writing that they do, and they have to do a lot of revising. And then my third year, my classes beyond that, I'll have weekly writing of some kind. My film classes have, different kinds of analysis. We do different things to interact with film. Some of my classes have research papers, but as far as challenges and changes I've seen over the years, it's gotten really, I find that it's gotten really difficult to have students, students seem to be more and more reticent to do proposals, or they don't understand what a proposal entails, even though I have models and, I think I'm explaining it okay. For some reason they want to, they just want to jump over that step. So like my multi-project now, I've emphasized the importance of, okay, what are 5 questions you want to answer, through the research you're going to do for your multi-project, and, noting that things might change and the questions might change as they get deeper into it, but what are their starting points? So I liked what you said about, what was it, writing to read, which is a switch from
Erin's
Erin's
next
I
book
was
title.
talking about it, but it was Erin's brilliant.
I looked it up. There's a book called Writing to Read, Reading to Write.
Yeah, which is
Dang
so
it, they
that-
got us.
That's interesting. I'd like to hear more about that. So, how to make it fun. Having them write. Specifically, we're talking about writing, right?
Successes and challenges.
Right, having them write about things that are meaningful to them and important to them, and there's usually a lot of latitude in my classes of what they can write on. In my 322 class, which they do get UWR for, they do a writing assignment on it that's autobiographical, about the decisions they've made in their life, and the bifurcations of the road that they've taken. And since they're all relatively young, I said you can include what decisions your parents made that affected you, particularly like if their parents were born in another country, and why did they come to this country, and obviously, so I have a couple of pre-writing exercises that we do for that. One is this short film called The Adventures of Rosa, and it's based on the book, writing your Choose Your Own Adventure book. That series where a reader can choose to jump forward to a certain page if they want to go in a different direction, or, so talking about how you choose your, if you choose this one, you're going to go in this direction. So, so always trying to make it fun.
Okay, great. I'm not sure I was completely neutral, but I think we had more successes than challenges. Successful capstone projects are emerging from this work. Awards, publications are coming from it. Successfully integrating pedagogical approaches like writing for reading, co-authoring work successfully, creating a deeper sense of ownership of the work using writing, seeing successful portfolios. We're seeing skill transfer through the use of writing, And we're seeing assignments and work that is meaningful and creative. So I think that all sounds very positive and successful. Challenges were how to make it fun, how to do analysis of evidence, or provide evidence. I can't remember what all we said around that. Learning how to do close reading, or demonstrating close reading, revising, being willing to change their writing, integrating or actually using the outside sources instead of just dropping them in, and then challenges with proposals specifically. And I was thinking about how to write that, Jill, as maybe challenges with different or unexpected genres. If they're so used to an essay or a typical essay, and then you say proposal, and they're really thrown off by that, that's interesting. But I will just say that I have a proposal in one of the classes that I teach, which to me is a really straightforward genre. It's not all that long, it's an imaginative, you get to say, you just get to make promises. You don't even actually have to do the thing, it's a genre I like. And my students really, it seems like they have never encountered a proposal before in their life, and that just understanding this has been really challenging.
Yeah, that's what I asked them. Don't you do this in other classes? And I don't know why it's so far into that.
Yeah.
At least in our program, it comes very late because it's part of kind of the methods.
Everyone to hear.
I understand. Yeah. So in our program, research proposals come very late because they're kind of doing their methods training, and then they have to start proposing what their capstone project is going to be. And they actually, I have had students that have written a proposal for the class and then done their capstone on something else, right? But it gives them like an articulate way to think about, okay, doing some library research and thinking about ethics and thinking about methods and thinking about like, how am I going to apply all of these things that I've learned over the past 2 to 4 years in doing their work. So that may be why, depending on what level you're kind of coming at, like I wouldn't imagine that sophomore students have a lot of experience in kind of proposal writing.
Yeah, we definitely have more of that proposal later on, year 4. But also, it seems like kind of a skill for life. Aren't you sort of thinking about what you might do, even just a step back from the academia? And it seems like some of those connections are challenging right now for some reason. Anything else we want to add to our list of challenges or successes, just generally? I like that the successes are longer.
What's not up there is AI, right?
Yeah.
So.
I was kind of expecting that to come up. But.
AI and Google Translate in my field. Getting them to not use those tools.
Okay.
Or to use them wisely, I should say.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I could also add that it's possible that students are reluctant to revise because the writing isn't theirs.
Yes. That's what I think about too, increasingly with revision and reading, particularly. We see that in the writing center with the tutors working one-on-one, and the students doesn't want to mess with the paper, doesn't really want to dig in, and that's a sign that maybe they didn't actually write it,
In that sense, it's not there because they didn't write it. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I've done over my long career, I've done some work with students around plagiarism issues, and when the student has plagiarized, they almost can't read the document or can't process it, which makes revision comments difficult to answer because they're not quite sure what the paper's doing.
They didn't author it.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to put plagiarism up there.
Yeah.
I would also add under successes when we teach students have the ability to use tools correctly. So when we have taught them how to use a tool correctly, whether it be anything, I'm going to take the other side of it, AI to the writing center. So anywhere in between that whole track, right? Whether we're going to a tutor or using something. So I think using it correctly is also important. And when we see that done correctly, so I'm gonna take that other side.
Yeah, I mean, the tools, effective use of tools, AI can be a tool, integrating the library, you know, finding effective sources, that's a tool that can be used. What was the other one? Did you say another one?
I just had the writing center, but I was also
tutoring, right? That
tutoring.
is a tool, right, that they can use to improve their writing. So I think those are all great points. So our successes are still longer. That's great. So the next few slides are about UWR stuff, but I think I'm going to jump ahead for right now to talk a little bit about some of the key ideas that I think apply to writing at any level for people who maybe aren't sure what should be happening when they're teaching writing for UWR or any writing. And so I think a really key idea to when you're teaching writing is to know that, or think about writing as a process. So effective writing is not usually immediately perfect and polished. And that's because it's a process. And so, and with the AI and the plagiarism these days, I frequently am happy to see some of the old time mistakes that I used to see, right, 10 years ago more. So, but yeah, to know that it's a process, and taking Writing 121 isn't like, great, now we never have to talk about writing again, we've solved writing. You know, literacy is a lifelong thing that we develop. And so I think that's important to keep in mind when we're teaching writing. Literacy and writing are connected, so we've touched on that a little bit, but creating opportunities for reading, for students to read and to comprehend is part of writing in your classes. It's part of the UWR experience. We can't separate them. So creating writing or reading experiences, similar to Nancy's point about writing for reading, I think is important to remember. And I think sometimes there's this sense of students should do all the reading at home, do the reading, come to class having done the reading. And how often do you show up and they haven't done the reading? And I think it's really completely necessary sometimes and valuable to read in class, to look closely at a text as a class, read, reread. And I tell this to my tutors often. They start by asking the student to read their paper, if it's a traditional piece. And then they feel like they have to know everything, they have to remember it, they need to remember what the revision priorities are. But when I model tutoring, we're rereading paragraphs. So let's look at this again. Let's, constantly rereading together. So I think that's an important concept that applies almost always. I think it's helpful to create both low stakes and high stakes writing opportunities. So for me, and you can maybe think about what low stakes, do you have low stakes writing? And do you have high stakes writing? And what do those look like? For my classes, low stakes writing would be more discussion posts oftentimes, and then the higher stake writing, rough drafts, drafts that they're bringing for peer review. Those can be really messy. And in fact, writing is a process, and so I like seeing the process. Writing peer review feedback to each other, that's in low stakes writing, but it's really important. Does anyone else have ideas of low stakes versus high stakes writing examples from their classes?
I don't know if I have examples from my classes, but I'm just the place that my mind went when you were talking about that was kind of grade weight.
Yeah.
You know, it's always
yeah.
like, you know, if it's a rough draft and it's 10% of the final class grade or something, you know, or less, right? Then I kind of take it to be kind of low stakes, and I'm like, this is going to be messy. I just get something out. Let's start the process. And so they're turning in these kind of relatively low stakes sections and getting kind of copious feedback from me and or their classmates, and then kind of having the higher stakes final drafts. And that's in line with the UWR model, right? Where you have these kind of drafts and things build up over to this kind of final paper. But, you know, thinking about it, like by the time we get to the final draft, it's not that much higher stakes with regard to the grade weight than some of the other drafts, because we've had kind of so many kind of touch points throughout the term. But maybe 20% instead of 10%, right? Or something like that. So that's just where my mind went when you were talking about it.
I'm going to walk this too, but I think the way I do that is when I'm introducing an assignment, that's more low stakes, and then reinforcing it goes up on that stakes. And then when we get to like that understanding for quote unquote mastery, or getting to that component that you should be able to do this on your own, that's more of a high stakes component. So when it's introducing something and it's going to be muddy, right? Because it's a brand new skill. So that's going to be lower stakes for me. But I hear what you're saying with the low stakes and high stakes. But when I'm equating it to my classes, I think that's where I'm going with it, is this introduction of material. There's no expectation to be proficient at it yet. You're getting to know this. And then there's a reinforcement period where you're practicing it. And then finally this total proficiency of it. That's where I went with it.
Absolutely. I feel like that's such an ed way to frame it. It's like, and like very helpful.
So my challenge, I think, has been, because I teach, the majority of my classes are teaching teachers how to teach social studies, be it undergraduate, elementary, or secondary. And one of the challenges I have found is to getting them to understand, and you had it earlier there, that reading and writing are, you know, integrated. And those can be integrated into social studies. And as we are seeing more and more districts push out science, social studies, art, music, because they have to have so much time spent on ELA. I'm like, well, ELA does not mean you have to just keep doing the same thing over and over. It can mean, hey, you're writing a journal, and your journal is maybe about a child, their age, coming across the Oregon Trail. Or maybe it's a child that is a part of an indigenous tribe that is seeing this coming into their lands. Or maybe you're reading about a piece, be it a historical fiction, or you're looking at a piece of art and you are seeing how those relate. And so, for instance, I always use with my students Norman Rockwell's picture of Ruby Bridges, her walking, and you just see her, you only see the top pieces of the federal agents that are walking her to school, and you see the tomato in the background and some of the graffiti in the back, and getting them to see those things, talk about them, ask questions about them, and then how can they maybe either integrate that into a literature or a writing assignment that still meets their social studies, and getting them to think about very creative ways to integrate both reading and writing into their social studies that also meets those hours that they're needing to do or minutes they're needing to do for ELA. Yes, it was done, it was a life, it was a Life cover magazine. I think he did it in, and it was for Life because the Saturday Evening Post would actually, they felt like he was getting too political. If you'll give me a moment, Jill, I'll find the name of it for you.
So, Dave, Are you suggesting that the journal articles or the reflection on the Rockwell, are these low stake assignments that are being integrated through there?
The beginnings of them, say, Aaron, if we're just talking about it, because I use a Library of Congress kind of model for teaching with primary sources. So I would say as they're, doing the questioning and the reflecting and what they're noticing, that would maybe be low stakes. And then if you're taking it a little bit further on, the journaling, say, like, that would probably become a little bit more high stakes. And in some cases, I think it becomes more high stakes because they're having to be a little bit more creative in how they're approaching and thinking about it.
This conversation also makes me realize the thing missing here is no stakes, right? Which is for me, let's spend a couple minutes writing about this, and then let's discuss, right? Get our minds on the topic again. I think that works really well to start a discussion. Any other no stakes writing?
I don't know if it's, in a sense it's no, like
Nothing's no stakes.
I have lots of assignments that are just do it and get the credit, because I'm looking for them to just experiment or free write or whatever, and I don't really need it to be a certain quality. And I often do, like, I have students, let's say I have students annotate, right? So that's one kind of writing that they do that they just get credit for doing. I have students do free writing or work in class where they're getting credit for just having done it. And then sometimes that work is a paragraph for the paper assignment, so they're sort of scaffolded into the higher stakes assignment by completing little steps of the process ahead of time. And then suddenly you can say, okay, well, those 4 paragraphs are the start of your draft. Okay, bye. Go do the draft. Some students find that frustrating because they don't have a sort of like sense of where they're headed. But I often feel that students sometimes just need to be tricked into doing the thinking and the writing, and then suddenly, aha, there it is. Your paper's done. Just put it together.
Or that the proposal could actually be the intro paragraph practically, so, then they've got a foot in the door already, so.
In classes where I use digital storytelling practice, we do kind of workshop type stuff. So it's like 5x8 cards, right, to everybody, and then it's like, okay, well, write down some ideas about assets that you might use, or write down some ideas about voiceover dialogue or music or sounds that you might use. And so that's kind of no stakes, because then they take it, but they just use it as kind of a starting point, and then they integrate it into a digital storytelling practice later, whether that's kind of an introductory project where they're just learning how to use it, or their final projects down the road.
I'm also thinking of a no stakes for a student, but maybe high stakes or high impact for an instructor would be at the end of a class, a note card or a Canvas entry or something that is, tell me 2 things you learned today and 1 thing that you're really struggling with still. It gives you a lot of, it's not difficult for them to complete, right? It's a no stakes, like, let me just write this down. You have to set that up though in how you build your classroom, which I guess I do, so that's no stakes. They don't feel the stakes, but I get a lot out of that as an instructor, to be able to know what they're walking away with. But yeah, so it's those formative assessments, right? But where the struggle is still happening, or where it's like not making sense yet. So that can be, so it's not that it's no stakes, but it's not difficult for them to write that out, but it gives me, it makes a lot of impact on where I'm gonna go next, right?
That's great. This conversation is kind of reminding me of this idea that the only way to get better at writing is writing, and unfortunately, right? And reading and engaging in peer review and engaging in the process, but there are so many ways that students are already writing that we maybe just don't even see or recognize, and that's all really valuable. So the other piece is create opportunities for revision. And so some of the main ones that I put up here is peer review. This happens in class or maybe on Canvas through the discussion. They're replying and responding to each other, or even the peer review feature on Canvas where they're assigned to groups and can respond to writing that way. And then writing tutoring, going to peer tutors to revise, and then teacher response, of course, giving them feedback on what they might do moving forward. And peer review, who was saying this earlier? You're giving good advice about how to do the thing, but you're not doing it yourself. And that is such an interesting thing to watch, I think, as a teacher, where their ability to start to recognize it and articulate it for others often comes in before they can start to effectively doing it themselves. But it's like an interesting developmental point to see them starting to do that. I don't, it's just an observation of mine that it seems like it happens in that order. But it's such a powerful part of writing. My writing tutors, their writing just accelerates like crazy after a year of being tutors because they've seen so much writing. Their own writing improves a lot through going through the peer review process. Students often think, well, I'm going to give you my draft and you fix it for me, you make it better, but reading each other's drafts, that alone, that's such a critical part of their improvement and applying it to their own essay. And then create opportunities for reflection. I think, the one time today, what did you learn? What are you still struggling with? I think that's really important. And I think it's often an afterthought, or it happens at the end of the term, or something that I frequently get. It's hard not to set up reflection assignments where they tell a success story, a success narrative. At first it was really hard, and then I worked hard, and now it is better, right? This like narrative arc over and over and over, rather than like really getting substantive about what happened. I don't know if you all see that with reflective writing, but it's this ongoing challenge I have. We know it's an important part of improving writing and the writing process and helping with transfer skills and helping with them to be able to do it again. And I think it's challenging to create meaningful reflection opportunities for students. What do you all do? Any ideas, or how do you handle that?
Yes.
All right, with the answers.
I don't know if this is the answer, but with our pre-service teachers, we do a lot of journal reflections, and it got to be where it was always the Dear Diary. I called it the Dear Diary reflection. Today I did this. Today I'm like, I started saying, if you need to add Dear Diary at the beginning, add your Dear Diary. But that's not what I'm going to be looking for. So if you need to get that out of the way, get that out of the way. And then set it to the side. And then dive into one aspect from that day. Dive into one of those components and really tease it apart and tell me what's going on. What's the underlying issue? What did you do about it? What happened in the process? So giving some of those maybe key phrases, thought-provoking components to get them to dive under that and get past the Dear Diary. Now they all know I'm going to tell them, get past the Dear Diary moment, but I think that has been helpful. Or for an assignment, they'll have an assignment and I'll ask them to reflect on a part of the process of the assignment or how it has affected them in their, maybe a student teaching placement the next week, or how it's affected a lesson. So taking the reflection and not just giving a blanket reflection, but being more specific with the reflection so that to help them get to that deeper diving point, not assuming that they can just get there on their own, because they can't until they've had an opportunity. You have to guide them to get to that deeper reflection. Otherwise, you read a lot of Dear Diary moments. A lot
At
of
first
them.
it was hard, and now it is easy. Well, your comment makes me realize just how much analysis is involved in reflection. And I think that's an important connection to make.
I think it's interesting because as you were talking about this and you mentioned the 5-paragraph thing, and I was thinking back to when I taught in elementary. I think some of the ways that we teach writing that, oh, I need to start with the beginning and then go to the, and I remember once I stopped going, I don't want to hear about getting in the car and driving to the lake and doing this. I said, drop me in the moment. And the moment was when you realized you fell into the lake and how cold it was and you couldn't swim. Start there. Don't tell me all the stuff coming up to it. That's what you're trying to get to. And once I saw that with my students, they began to think, oh, this is how I can start. And kind of like you were saying, it's like, okay, just, pick a thing and just go right there. I don't need all the lead up to it, the Dear Diary or whatever, And so I think, when you get into that, as you were noting, I think you get a richer, deeper sense of, what you're wanting the student to talk about, rather than just ticking off, kind of like we do with our kids. How was the day? Oh, and so you have to figure out a different way of going about it to get them to talk,
Is that universal?
Absolutely. Don't ever ask how your day was, because you're going to get the worst answer ever. Except Aaron.
I'm going to jump ahead. The other key point I wanted to bring up, I wouldn't be the director of the Writing Center if I didn't, was just the role that the Writing Center can play with writing in our classes and that process. So oftentimes students come to the Writing Center asking the tutor to fix my paper. And they're really not trained in that approach. It's a hierarchy of revision priorities that they go through usually. And but a lot of the ideas that we've discussed today, writing is a process. We need students to be willing to change their writing, revise their writing, take ownership of their writing. And going to talk to a tutor and move things around and mess it up a little bit is a part of that, engaging in that process. So in the end, they might think, well, they didn't edit my paper, but we know that that was still a valuable exercise for them to take 30 minutes, read their paper out loud, and I use these traditional forms, papers, whatever the piece may be, and engage with their draft more. That's an important part of the writing process as well. So those were sort of my key ideas for teaching writing. Does anybody have anything to add or to elaborate on from those?
I was thinking about what Angela said about training peer feedback. There's this great article from the National Writing Project long ago called The Black Ninja Fish. It's one of my favorite articles, and it's about teaching kindergartners to give peer feedback. And when I teach writing with my first year students, I often use the strategies. For example, the first time students encounter other students writing, the only thing they can say is thank you, because they'll want to say more. And I'm like, zip it, no zip it, no zip it. Thank you. Thank you is what you say. And then the next time they encounter a student writing, they can say something positive. Can't say anything else. They can only say something, right? So it's sort of like building this, gathering power inside them of things they want to say about other people's stuff that they're not allowed to say. And so finally, when they get to the moment where they're actually invited to say, okay, why don't you make a recommendation for something to change? They're so ready, and they're so good at it by then, because they've already they've built trust, right? So the people in the classroom are used to now reading each other's things. They're used to having supportive listeners. And so by the time they get to the critique, they're actively critically thinking, and they're trusting each other to provide it. So I really liked the idea that that even kindergartners could do it. They just have to be scaffolded.
Yeah, I think the idea of creating safe spaces is really important, so that students feel they can express themselves. I know you all know this, but everything I'm saying is about writing in a second language for the most part. So there's other challenges associated with that. And when I do put them in, you know, in groups of 2 or 3 to help each other, you know, typically or often, you know, especially if I have a native speaker, a heritage speaker, you know, often they're like, you know, correcting away, you know, so I have to be very direct and say, no, I want you to ask questions of each other. I want you to say, well, tell me more about, you know, X, Y, and Z, and you know, so you have to be really clear about what you're expecting when they are working together. So, but you all know that. So.
I just wanted to add, and maybe, you know, because we were focused on the writing, and maybe because I used to work with young boys and they always struggled with that, because in their brain it's like, okay, I am going like this, but my hand is going like this. And so I can't keep that thought. And so they get very frustrated. And so thinking about how can we use, and you mentioned storytelling, and I was also thinking about ESL students, particularly from cultures that are storytelling dominated, how we can integrate that in and allow that type to come to the table, and then figure out how to be able to take that and get it into a writing form, be it talk to text or be it however.
Using your tools. Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great point. After being a writer for many, many decades, I'm a really fast typist, right? But your comment reminds me that it was not always the case, and how that process of writing or typing, right, can just slow the whole thing down, and that's a really literal kind of physical aspect of it. Well, we're kind of closing in on the time. Hopefully we have inspired some thinking about writing in our classes. Our success list is still longer than our challenges. I didn't really, there were slides about UWR and what that means, and so for people who are maybe listening online who want to find them, I always Google EOUUWR, and it takes me right there. To just see what it is, the expectations of the writing that happens at that level in those classes. But I think we'll end it there.
Okay. Thank you, Sherry. Join us next Thursday at 4 o'clock for information literacy and integrating sources with Nancy and Sarah. Yes. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.